Chapter 1. Observation of morals and manners depends on two partners, the observer and the observed. The mind of the observer is as essential as the material he studies. A bad instrument yields a bad product. In this work, the traveler must begin with a clear aim. Morals cannot be learned by random tinkering, but require a guiding purpose. We encounter a world of varied desires, social needs, and customs, yet the goal is to measure them by the general happiness their society sustains. Prejudice, whether philosophical or national, must be set aside, and judgments should not hinge on oddities or on hometown expectations. One nation's rights should not be dismissed simply because they differ from ours. To judge by tiny differences is to miss the broader truth. Section 2 adds that observation requires more than senses. It requires guiding principles to interpret facts. The examples of the blind and the deaf traveler show how disciplined thinking can compensate for missing data, and that a traveler should cultivate general principles to test and organize what is seen, not merely collect it. 1. The observer and the observed are both essential to moral observation. 2. Morals require a clear aim and should be tested by general happiness, not by home standards. 3. Avoid prejudice. Judge cultures by broad, high principles. 4. Do not rely on small differences to judge overall morals and manners. 5. Principles and disciplined interpretation are needed alongside senses. Test the morals by the essentials of human happiness. None. 1. Define what you want to learn about a society's morals and happiness before you observe. 2. Equip observations with guiding moral principles to interpret facts. 3. Guard against prejudice and strive to understand practices on their own terms. Chapter 2. To observe morals and manners accurately, the traveler must enter with a clear aim, tested principles, and a concrete sense of how big social forces shape right and wrong. The author argues that an observer would be perfect, yet since we are not, we should identify what tends to distort observation and learn to guard against it. The central requirement is sympathy, an unreserved heart capable of understanding others' domestic life, thoughts, and feelings. Without it, a traveler may track public spectacles or statistics but miss the deeper truth of character and custom. Martineau recalls an American merchant who found common ground with Chinese friends by sharing broad questions about belonging, beyond religious labels, underscoring that minds open to others report more accurately. Rules and religion arise from universal convictions. A stranger who cannot feel the sentiment behind them cannot grasp the spirit of a people's politics or daily life. The chapter ends by warning that unsympathetic observers will misread even Haiti's dramatic events around Toussaint Louverture. Sympathy is essential to understand morals and manners. Prejudice and distortion hinder cross-cultural observation. Guard against them. Understanding comes from feeling sentiments and social rules, not just outward forms. Universal human hearts enable connection across differences. Rules and religion grow from shared convictions and sentiment. Nothing was ever more true than that, as face answers to face in water, so is the heart of man. Rogers, philosopher of morality and religion. Wordsworth, romantic poet and observer. American merchant, traveler and interpreter of morals. Toussaint Louverture, Haitian revolutionary leader. Ulking, mythical figure in a fairy tale. Christ Hospital boys, royal dress examples. Cultivate unfettered sympathy to truly understand others. Identify and guard against common biases that distort cross-cultural observation. Seek to understand the underlying sentiments and social rules behind customs, not just outward forms. Chapter 3. The author argues that a traveler cannot truly observe a people's morals unless he travels in a way that allows wide contact and conversation. Ambassadors and formal expeditions too often shut out living voices, and English travelers, whether alone, with family, or with friends, tend to isolate themselves with pride, hindering genuine engagement with the societies they visit. True understanding, Martineau suggests, comes from moving slowly on foot, especially in America and across Europe, where social dynamics are revealed through everyday interactions rather than through stately carriage. Pedestrian travel offers freedom, the ability to linger, choose routes, converse with locals, listen to place sounds, and observe daily life in sun or rain. The author contrasts the joys of a drenched wagon ride with the brisk vitality of a walker who notices small scenes, doors, woods, waterfalls, and with time to approach famous sights gradually. The anecdote of Dunkeld and Burnham would illustrates the magic of a slow, exploratory approach to landscapes. 1. Pedestrian travel enables broad social observation. 2. Formal travel isolates travelers from locals and morals. 3. Slow, flexible movement fosters engagement with places and people. 4. Weather and terrain enrich, not merely hinder, the journey. 5. Gradual arrival at famous sites heightens anticipation and understanding. The pedestrian traveler is the true observer. Harriet Martineau, narrator and observer. English traveler, aloof, social outsider. Pedestrian traveler, independent observer. 1. Favor walking over riding to observe morals and manners. 2. Seek opportunities to mingle with locals and learn from daily life. 3. Plan flexible itineraries that allow rest, rain days, and spontaneous detours. Chapter 4. The chapter argues that understanding liberty in any society requires watching how power is exercised rather than listening to proclamations. It describes how feudal remnants, obedience to a landowner or ruler, and the consent of dependents to marriages or property show a society lacking true liberty. Martineau then offers everyday tests. A man jokingly ordered to dance by a police agent shows how easily obedience can be manufactured. Contrast this with the United States, where public gatherings are guided by voluntary, courteous restraint rather than force, and where crowds help the process by giving up seats or yielding to a band. The police's role is central. In a liberty-minded regime, they serve as stewards of the common good under representative government or self-government, not as arbitrary masters. The traveler's observations across nations illustrate how authority varies. In France, Italy, Spain, Switzerland, Germany, Poland, and Russia, freedom is limited or mediated by different institutions and fears. The presence or absence of liberty reveals itself in the character of restraint and the approach to public life. 1. Feudal remnants reveal a lack of true liberty. 2. Liberty grows where police serve the public good under representative or self-government. 3. Public order based on consent, not coercion, signals a liberty-minded society. 4. Travel observations show varied authority across nations and cultures. Liberty shows itself when the people govern themselves. Austrian middle-rank civilian, ordinary subject of deference. Paul Louis Courier, French observer and traveler. Emperor Paul I, Russian rulers cited in examples. United States, example of liberty through popular will. 1. Observe whether public order rests on consent and social will rather than force. 2. Note whether police are agents of the people's good or instruments of rulers. 3. Compare movement, speech, and assembly rules across societies to gauge prevailing ideas of liberty. Chapter 5. The chapter argues that despite differences in methods, all thoughtful minds agree that a world where people live as brothers would mark the highest stage of society. The key question becomes how to arrange the parts and proportions of humanity so that some lead while all are respected. Martineau notes that this ideal is not yet universal. Nations quarrel over domestic arrangements and rightful leadership. Yet the fraternal spirit is already at work, beginning with reforms that aid the helpless not out of mere sentiment but through broad, abstract commitments to humanity. Travel observations show how openness and intercourse among peoples, through trade, ideas, and enlightenment, correspond with moral progress. Islands and colonies reveal the limits of progress when independence is blocked. Homogeneous populations may retain virtue but often lack the wider sympathy that comes with continental contact. The prospect of universal fraternity rests partly on domestic reforms and partly on global exchange, a dawn that has begun and may brighten into noon. Fraternity is the guiding principle behind progress. Domestic reforms demonstrate the fraternal spirit in action. Global exchange accelerates moral advancement. Colonies illustrate progress depends on independence. Homogeneity versus diversity shapes virtue and progress. The fraternal spirit has dawned, progress now visible in society. England, island nation observer. France, continental reform influence. Malta, colonial island society. West India Islands, colonial territories. New England, homogeneous American society. Observe signs of the fraternal spirit to gauge a country's progress. Consider openness and contact with other nations as drivers of moral advancement. Recognize that independence matters for the moral development of colonies and the society at home. Chapter 6. The chapter sets out a method for observing morals and manners through the discourse people exchange. Individual testimony varies widely, so no single voice can be trusted for a broad picture. However, when gathered with discipline, conversations yield fixed points that illuminate larger facts. The traveler should seek talk with all classes, rich and poor, merchants and laborers, young and old, mothers with children, entertainers and rulers alike, and listen in homes, markets, balls, and streets. In this way, discourse becomes a mirror of social character. Towns speak differently from villages, and nations differ in sincerity, candor, or playfulness. It also shows what interests people most, from domestic ties to ambition, glory, liberty, or wealth, and how these primary concerns are filtered by local influences such as priests, pride, superstition, or politics. The value rests on comparing voices with broader knowledge and letting sympathy guide interpretation, rather than relying on a few statements. Caution remains, for a traveler sees only a fraction of any society, though discourse can still reveal its essential tendencies. Gather voices from all social classes and settings to build a fuller picture. Discourses reflect general social character and cultural tendencies. People's conversations reveal what interests them most and how that varies locally. Do not generalize from isolated voices. Use comparison and sympathy to interpret. Universal interests, like domestic ties, are modified by local forces. Discourse comments on observed facts. Talk with people from diverse walks of life to inform understanding. Compare multiple voices to identify universal interests and local differences. Let openness and empathy guide interpretation, not preconceived notions.